Dave Talks Comics, Episode 126, Legion of Superheroes, The Great Darkness Saga, Part 6. Welcome to Dave Talks Comics, the program where I talk about comic books, cartoons, and comic book conventions. All past episodes can be streamed or downloaded from the program's website, davetalkscomics.com. In addition to the program's website, this podcast can also be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and Facebook. This is the next to last episode of my coverage of Legion of Superheroes, The Great Darkness Saga Deluxe Edition. In the first segment of this episode, I will be looking back and following up on something that I mentioned in passing on an earlier episode. That is, the pre-crisis on Infinite Earths deaths of Superboy's parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent. And then in the second segment, I will be talking about Legion of Superheroes number 295. And in case you were wondering, yes, there will be spoilers in this episode. I have one update to make from an earlier episode when I was talking about the Great Darkness Saga, and that's from episode 107 of the podcast, which was the fourth part of the Great Darkness Saga coverage, in which I was talking about Legion of Superheroes issue 291, and one of the things that came up in there, which I mentioned but I really didn't follow up on, and I didn't really have any plans to follow up on it, but what happened was there was a scene with Saturn Girl and Superboy, and I guess also Lightning Lad, although Lightning Lad was comatose at the time, certainly out of it in some way. This was as a result of the events of Legion of Superheroes Annual Number 1, when Computo took over the Legion headquarters, and the Legionnaires had to fight back and eventually won. But Lightning Lad wound up with some sort of a fever or something, and Superboy wasn't in that issue, but he came to visit in issue 291. I think he was also in issue 290. And he was talking to Saturn Girl, and Saturn Girl was very broken up about this, and there was something she didn't want to tell him. And then after he left, she thinks to herself, I couldn't tell him, but the history books show that the Kents died of a mysterious fever almost exactly like this one. And I wasn't sure exactly when that happened or where that happened, but I assumed that it had been in comic books in the early 80s, around that time. And I didn't bother to look it up, but recently I was flipping through an old issue of Comics Feature, which was a comic fanzine from the 1980s, issue 11 to be precise. And I'd gotten this, I haven't had this for very long. I got this through an eBay auction that I won, or it may have been a buy it now, but anyway, it was through eBay. And what it was I got 14 issues of Comics Feature. There was one in particular that I was interested in, which is the one that I was reading right then, issue 11, because it had an interview with Roy Thomas from around the time that he was starting All-Star Squadron. But after I read the Roy Thomas interview, I was flipping through the issue, and in the front they had like a bunch of, I think they call it short subjects, and they had a lot of little blurbs, and about comic books that were coming out in the very near future. And one of those was for Action Comics number 363, which was titled The Last Days of Lois and Lana, in which Lois Lane and Lana Lang contract the same disease which killed Ma and Pa Kent. And that's the copy from the ad, or from that short subjects little piece, little blurb. So that got me interested again. Now, this issue came out in September of 1981. That would have been a couple years before this issue of Legion of Superheroes. So I started going back and trying to figure out, okay, well, when did the Kents die? Maybe this can help me to find when they died. So I just Googled the death of Ma and Pa Kent, and that led me to Wikipedia, and I found the answer there. And the answer is that it happened in Superman number 161, which was called The Last Days of Ma and Pa Kent. Although that's not the cover story, so you won't see that on the cover. But it is the first story in the issue. I have not read this. This issue was dated May of 1963, so this is 20 years before the Great Darkness Saga. Although I guess in the timeline of Superboy's life, it wasn't 20 years before. So I have not read this. I don't own the issue. It's not available in Comixology. I did look into that. Nor is the story that involves the last days of Lois and Lana. That is also not on Comixology. But it has been reprinted a few times. The Superman number 161 story on the death of Ma and Pa Kent. It first was reprinted in Superboy number 165, which is dated May-June of 1970. Although, from what I read on comics.org, the Grand Comics database, they changed the heads of Ma and Pa Kent slightly, because at some point Ma and Pa Kent had been de-aged, because originally they were supposed to be much older, and then at some point they were more, instead of being like senior citizens, they were more middle-aged. And so in the reprint, they changed the appearance of their heads, their faces, so that they looked middle-aged as opposed to looking like they were senior citizens like they had looked when the story first appeared in Superman number 161. It was also reprinted, it also has been reprinted in a couple collections. Superman in the 60s and the fourth volume of Showcase Prevents Superman. And from what I understand in this story, Superboy sends Ma and Pa Kent on a cruise in the Caribbean, and they find a pirate's chest or something like that when they were stopped on an island, and there's some disease that comes out of the pirate's chest, some fever, and then they get sick and they die from that, from what I understand. The other story that I mentioned, the Last Days of Lois and Lana, that has not been reprinted, and it was a two-parter. It was in Superman's number 362 and 363. So this answers the question of the deaths of Ma and Pa Kent. I got to say, I'm a little surprised though that it actually went back that far and that it stood for that long. But then I guess this was the Silver and the Bronze Age that we're talking about, where things weren't being rewritten quite as frequently as they are in the modern era, in the 21st century, and even post-crisis on Infinite Earths. Legion of Superheroes number 295, which is cover dated January of 1983, is the next to last, the penultimate issue in the Great Darkness Saga, Legion of Superheroes, the Great Darkness Saga Deluxe Collection. The battle with Darkseid, of course, ended in the previous issue, but the story goes on. The story goes on. There's aftermath, there's after effects. This issue is called The Origin of the Universe File. It's, once again, the writer is Paul Levitz. Now, the artwork is divvied up. There is a bookend story which takes up maybe a third of the issue, and that is drawn by Keith Giffen and Dave Hunt. Keith Giffen and Dave Hunt. Giffen on the pencils, Hunt on the inks. And then there's a story within the story, kind of nested within this story, which is, the penciler on that is Howard Bender, and I assume, based on the credits, that Dave Hunt also did the inks on that. But it's a little unclear. So there's two stories. There's one nested within the other. The outer story only has three characters in it, and those are Block, Timberwolf, and Lightlass. And Block and Timberwolf have kind of been portrayed as being kind of buddies, hanging out. Maybe you remember from the first annual which I talked about in an earlier issue, which was also part of the Great Darkness Saga. They were hanging out together when Computo attacked the Legion at their headquarters. But that's all part of the past. The Great Darkness Saga is over, or the official Great Darkness Saga is over. And Timberwolf has a decision to make, and this is something that came up at the very end of the previous issue, number 294, which is that Light Lass has decided she wants to leave the Legion, and if Timberwolf wants to be with her, then he needs to leave the Legion also. And things have been frosty between the two of them, between Light Lass and Timberwolf, since she caught him embracing Saturn Girl when he and Saturn Girl and, Chameleon Boy and Shrinking Violet and Colossal Boy had crash landed on that asteroid after they'd gone on that mission to Kundia, which was led by Chameleon Boy, who was the leader of the Legion Suicide Squad, or the Legion Espionage Squad. That's what it was. I think they did kind of refer to them as the Legion Suicide Squad at some point, but the Legion Espionage Squad. And so all of the Legionnaires had been out looking for them, and the ones who found them were Dawnstar and Light Lass, and they showed up just as Timberwolf and Saturn Girl are embracing on this cold asteroid, which of course I guess serves as a metaphor for what happens to Light Lass and Timberwolf's relationship, which gets very cold. And for several issues there, she didn't even want to talk to him. And that all happened in she caught him in issue 289, and I talked about that on episode 95. So Block is encouraging Timberwolf to sit down. He's been watching old tapes of Legion adventures. I'm not sure exactly how these tapes came to be, but they're watching old episodes of the Legion of Superheroes, even though at that point there was no Legion of Superheroes TV show in our world. But anyway, so he puts in a tape and they watch this adventure. I have no idea who the cameraman would be, but okay, I'm getting way too nerdy on this. But so they watch this old story, and the title bit for this this is the story within the story. The title bit for this introduces it as just Tales of the Legion of Superheroes. And there's 5 members of the Legion that show up in this. There's Cosmic Boy, Saturn Girl, Lightning Lad, Triplicate Girl, and Colossal Boy. And they are, as it opens, they're rushing to the Time Institute. I'm not sure if the Time Institute has shown up before. I should look into that. But anyway, the Time Institute there's smoke coming out of the Time Institute, and so they rush in there. Colossal Boy tears the roof off, and, well, it turns out things aren't quite as bad as they seem. And they meet Circadius Senius, who is the Chronarch of the Time Institute. And to my eyes, he looks a little bit like one of the characters from Spy vs. Spy. I have to wonder if Keith Giffen didn't draw this, that's right. I have to wonder if Howard Bender modeled him. I mean, it's not exactly, but it's kind of the eyes and the shape of the face. And he looks kind of humanoid insect-like. He's, I think, orange, Let me see, let me open up the issue. He's orange with big black eyes. And let's see, let me find that page. Yeah, orange with big black eyes and wears a purple cloak. And anyway, so he explains to the Legionnaires what happened. That they were using the time viewer to look back at the origin of the universe. And they saw this hand at the origin of the universe, and then all of a sudden this lightning bolt struck, and that's when the smoke began, and the Legion showed up. And so anyway, so the Legion are there, so they decide to help out. They help the people who work there at the Time Institute to repair things, and then they decide to do exactly what they were doing before, which is to try and use the time viewer to look back and see what happened. Well, the same thing happens again. This giant lightning bolt strikes, and Lightning Lad is able to absorb some of the charge and prevent some damage. But then the Guardians of the Universe intervene. They transport, the Time Institute gets ripped out of the ground, out of Earth, and it gets thrown out in outer space, with, of course, everybody who's still inside is still inside. They're protected within a protective bubble of green energy, of course, because the Guardians of the Universe are, of course, the ones who started the Green Lantern Corps. They are not Green Lanterns themselves, but they are kind of the patrons of the Green Lanterns. They are the ones who created the Green Lantern rings and have given the Green Lantern rings to various people like, at this time, Hal Jordan. Well, not in this time period, though, because this is, of course, the 30th century, but back in the 20th century, they'd given them to Hal Jordan and other individuals throughout the universe. So they have ripped the Time Institute out of the ground, and they tell them that they're going to destroy the Time Institute. And at that point, three Green Lanterns show up, and they give them this whole lecture about forbidden knowledge and how you can't know about these things. And the Legionnaires aren't completely clear on this, but they get into a fight with the Green Lanterns, and finally the fight ends when Saturn Girl, somehow manages to telepathically contact the Guardians of the Universe. And so the Guardians of the Universe transport the Time Institute to Oa, their home planet. This is where it starts to get interesting for me, really interesting for me, because this is an issue which made me do a certain amount of research, and I really like that. I really like it when I get to dig into things. And so the Guardians explain why there is this prohibition on delving into the origins of the universe and using a time viewer to try and go back and view the origins of the universe. They tell them, the Guardians tell the Legion about Krona, who was an Owen, one of their people, a scientist who a long time before tried to do just what they did to look at the origin of the universe. Now, this story was first told in Green Lantern number 40. This is the Green Lantern series that Hal Jordan. So this is going back to the 1960s. I think it was something like 63 or something like that this Green Lantern story first appeared. And coincidentally, this was also the first crossover between the Golden Age Green Lantern and Alan Scott and Hal Jordan, the Silver Age Green Lantern. It's a very expensive issue. I looked into it. I mean, you can probably get a copy for under $100, but it's not going to be in the best of shape. But it has been reprinted a number of times. It is out there. It is available. It's not like it's hard. It's one of these issues which hasn't been reprinted. It's a very important issue because it's the first appearance of Krona. It's the first crossover between the Earth 1 and Earth 2 Green Lanterns. Krona, of course, became very important. He actually had not had that many appearances up to this point, and he does show up in this issue, although it's entirely in a flashback. But he had not had that many appearances up to this point. He showed up in that issue number 40 of the Green Lantern series from the 1960s, but then he did not show up again. My research is based on what I found online. I'm pretty sure it's correct. He did not show up again until there was a 3-issue miniseries called Tales of the Green Lantern Corps, which came out in 1981. I don't have it, and I haven't read it, but once again, that has been reprinted at least a couple times. So that is available, and in recent years, and I'm pretty sure it's not. I'm pretty sure it's in print, so it's not that hard to get your hands on it. Although I did look on Comixology, and I could not find it on Comixology, which was a bit bizarre, but as I've commented in the past, Comixology does not have the best search function. So it's possible that this miniseries is out there somewhere on Actually, you know what? I didn't look for that miniseries now that I think about it. I looked for Green Lantern number 40. That's what I looked for, and I couldn't find that on Comixology. Anyhow, Krona was the big bad guy in this 3-issue miniseries. So that was his second appearance. So this is only his third appearance ever in Legion of Superheroes number 295, the Origin of the Universe file. But what's interesting about this is that this is all going to lead into Crisis on Infinite Earths. And if you've read Crisis on Infinite Earths, then you probably and are as passionate about it as I am. And I'm not as passionate about it as some people are. I will not make any claim to being, the biggest fan of the series. But I did enjoy it quite a bit. I have read it more than once. I do have it both in issues and the trade paperback, and one of these days I want to get my hands on I'm not sure if it was a absolute edition or a deluxe edition, but I would like to get it, and I probably will reread it again at some point. But this whole image, which you see a few times in this issue, of people looking back, trying to use a time viewer to look back to the beginning of the universe and seeing a hand with some sort of a swirl inside it of a galaxy, I guess, like the Milky Way, inside it, within the palm of the hand, that is something that has shown up before. It also showed up in Justice League Unlimited in an episode that I talked about. There was the Once and Future Thing, which was the two-parter which ended the first season of the episodes 12 and 13 of JLU. And I talked about episode 13, which is the one where that showed up on episode 50 of this podcast. And it's interesting because they were dealing with a bad guy whose name was Kronos, not Krona, which is spelled Krona, but Kronos. Chronos, and this is not the original Kronos, but a subsequent character named Kronos, who is, I think there was at least a couple subsequent characters named Kronos. The original Kronos was an enemy, or was a nemesis of the Silver Age Atom, Ray Palmer, and goes back to that time period, although I don't know if he ever had any time travel abilities. I think he just had kind of like this clock motif in his costume, but I really don't know a lot about him. And then finally, on this whole note of Krona and the origin of the universe, I also wanted to mention the Crisis Tapes. The Crisis Tapes is a podcast which has been coming out intermittently for the past 7 years now. There's only been 15 episodes of it. It's done by Adam Murdo and Peter Rios, who are both members of the Comic Geek Speak podcast, although Peter doesn't show up very frequently these days on Comic Geek Speak. He was one of the founders of Comic Geek Speak, but he doesn't show up very frequently these days on the show. And I think he has his own podcast, The Daily Rios, but even that is rather intermittent in its publication. I don't think there's been a new episode in at least, I think, a few months at this point as I'm recording this now. But they did a number of episodes in great detail. But before they even got into the series, they talked about the background for Crisis on Infinite Earths, and then they finally got in, and they've only gotten as far as the first 3 issues at this point, and they go into quite a bit of detail, a lot more detail than I go into when I talk about comic books. So getting back to this issue, the Legion is on Oa. The Guardians of the Universe have explained to them and shown to them what Krona did and why nobody should, the dangers in trying to view the origins of the universe. And as they explain it to them, know that, and I'm reading here from the issue, know that from the day Krona was punished, evil was unleashed in the universe where it had never flourished before. And it's interesting because the footnote here, which says as originally revealed in Green Lantern number 40, is not in the collected edition. I bought an original copy of Legion of Superheroes number 295 at Heroes Con a few weeks ago. And there's a couple other footnotes, but I'd say this is probably the most, probably the one that surprises me the most that they didn't include it. But anyhow, so the Legion returns to the Time Institute. They return to Earth. They return to the Time Institute. They fix things up with some help from the Green Lanterns. But things get a little bizarre here because there was 5 members of the Legion up to this point in this story, and all of a sudden they're down to 3. Triplicate Girl and Cosmic Boy, or not Cosmic Boy, Colossal Boy, aren't with them anymore. And there's no explanation given whatsoever. And part of that may be because of what happens next. And that is that it's kind of implied, well, what we see is Cosmic Boy, Saturn Girl, and Lightning Lad go back in time in a time bubble to recruit Superboy and Supergirl. Which looks a lot like, which makes me wonder, is this supposed to be the prelude to the first appearance of the Legion in Adventure Comics number 247 from April of 1958, when there was only 3 members of the Legion, Cosmic Boy, Saturn Girl, and Lightning Lad? And if so, why were Colossal Boy and Triplicate Girl in this to begin with? What happened here? I just don't know. I mean, because this implies that Triplicate Girl and Colossal Boy were members of the Legion prior to the Legion's first appearance. Now, Triplicate Girl was at some point revealed to be the 4th member to join the team, the first non-founding member to join the team. I don't believe that's the case with Colossal Boy, although his history does go back to the 1960s, to the early to mid-1960s. So he definitely was with the team back then. But, so it just makes me, what is this? What's going on here? It's definitely an incongruity, I think. I guess not all readers would recognize this, and they don't make any, there's no footnotes here to explain that this is supposed to be the first appearance, but from the way they talk about it, it sounds like that they have never met Superboy or Supergirl before. So this was strange, and I wonder if there's any, I really would like to pick Paul Levitz's brain and see what was going on, if this was just a mistake on his part, or some misunderstanding between himself and the artist, or I don't know. Anyhow, they try going back in time to meet Superboy and Supergirl, but things go kind of weird. They start, as they're going back in time, all these weird creatures start showing up, and they end up having to fight with these, well, not all of them are weird, but there's like giant insects and pterodactyls, but then there's also rhinoceroses and looks like saber-toothed tigers and lions. So they return to the 30th century, having not met Superboy and Supergirl, only to discover that Ron Vidar, one of the Green Lanterns who they had met before, and it's kind of strange because there's 3 Green Lanterns who they meet in this issue. Only 2 of them are given names. One of the other ones who is not named, is revealed to be a Durlan, the same race as Chameleon Boy. In fact, she uses her powers as her chameleon powers, I guess you could say, her Durlan abilities. When she fights Triplicate Girl, she triplicates herself. And I didn't realize that Durlans could do that. I thought they could imitate any other life form, but I didn't realize they could also imitate anybody's powers. Not sure about that. It's another thing that's a little weird about this issue. But that may just be a misunderstanding on my part. So they return to the 30th century only to discover that it's Vidar. It's just Vidar. That Vidar is using the time viewer to look at the past. And he's, once again, we see the hand. This is like the 3rd time this has been shown in this issue. We see the hand, or maybe the 4th, the hand with the Milky Way or whatever, the spiral galaxy coming out of it. So they prevent him from looking at it any further. He thinks he's going to learn something by doing this. That this bolt of lightning comes down. He says, had you not interrupted, I would have used my ring to control that bolt and learn the Guardian's secret. So they fight. So the Legionnaires, the 3 Legionnaires, because the other 2 are just completely out of the story at this point. The 3 Legionnaires fight with Vidar. They defeat him and return him to Oa. In chains, the Guardians of the Universe take back the ring, and that's basically the end of this story. Oh, and then what we do get in here is we finally get, and this is something that I talked about on episode 101 of the podcast, when I talked about the first annual one of Legion of Superheroes, when there was that line when President of the Earth, Marty Allen, said, "No more Green Lanterns on Earth ever again." And this is where it comes from. Cosmic Boy tells the Guardians of the Universe, the government of Earth is more demanding, Guardians. They consider your interference unreasonable and destructive, so they insist you keep all Green Lanterns off Earth indefinitely. And the Guardians are like, well, we can see you guys, I'm paraphrasing, of course. We can see you guys have things kind of under control, so we're not going to, we'll abide by that. And that explains why there was no Guardians who came to, or no Green Lanterns that came to the rescue when Computo took over the Legion of Superhero headquarters in annual number 1. But it doesn't explain, to my mind, why there were no Green Lanterns that showed up in the finale of the Great Darkness Saga when the people from the planet that Mon-El is from, whose name is I'm blanking on at the moment, Daxamites, that's it, the Daxamites. When the Daxamites attacked, you saw people from all sorts of different planets fighting the Daxamites, but you didn't see any Green Lanterns at all. So I'm not sure what the deal is there. Maybe there's something to do with what was going on in the Green Lantern book at the time, even though that would have been set in the 20th century, not the 30th century. But so that's basically the end of the story within the story. And at this point, Timberwolf figures it out, because he was trying to mull over whether he should stay or he should go. And there's this great panel in here, which I really like, where you see Timberwolf doing a cartwheel off of the couch that he's been sitting on as they've been watching this episode of Tales of the Legion of Superheroes. And it's really neat how Keith Giffen draws this. You see he's doing this cartwheel, and his foot kind of goes out of panel and then comes back into panel. And of course you got the speed lines there to show it moving. But I really like the way it's drawn, and it's an excellent example of some of the great work that Keith Giffen did on this book. So he goes to Light Lass, and he talks to her, and he tells her about his decision, about how he feels at home here and how he wants to stay here. But the thing is that Light Lass is feeling just the opposite. She wants to go. There's too much sadness for her here. She says, there's too much pain here, too many losses for all our victories. I can't stay. And she walks out, and she leaves, and you can see that Timberwolf is really saddened by this, but he's decided he's going to stay. And then the final thing that you get in this issue, the last page, is all Block, and Block is looking at the monitors. He's doing a little bit of research, speculating about the strong resemblance between Vidar and another foe of the Legion who goes by the name of Universo. But then he shrugs it off because he says, well, if there was anything to this, then Brainiac 5 would have noticed this by now. So it must just be my imagination. Or he says something like that. I'm not reading his words exactly. A few more things I wanted to say about this issue. I really like it when an issue makes me think like this. And in reading it and rereading it, and reading the actual issue, because I first read it on the Kindle through my Kindle viewer, because I've got, and it's really neat being able to read the letters page and see all the notes and see some of the differences that show up. The art, I want to say something about Howard Bender's art. It's a very different look because the story, of course, is supposed to be set back in the 60s, or, well, the 60s of the 30th century, the story within the story. And the artwork definitely looks more primitive. I don't like that. I don't like to say primitive. It definitely looks simpler in some ways than the artwork it looks a lot more like something that maybe I don't know. I want to say Kurt Swan or one of those artists of that era would draw. It's not as fine-lined or as sophisticated as something like Keith Giffen draws. And maybe even sophisticated isn't the right word to use because that's not really fair. And while the characters and the faces and the way they draw them definitely seems not as modern, I guess, as Keith Giffen's art does, at the same time, the layouts of these pages don't look like something from the Silver Age. I mean, honestly, this looks like something that could have come from the 70s or the early 80s. I mean, it is representative of the period in which it emerged, but it definitely has a very different look than Keith Giffen's artwork. And the panel layout does not look like something from the Silver Age, even though the story is supposed to be from the Silver Age. And the costumes definitely. It's not like they tell a story that's supposed to be set in the Silver Age and they're using their current costumes. All of their costumes look like they looked back then, and the hairstyles and all of that. The letters page. Oh, well, I talked about the missing footnotes a little bit. There was 3 missing footnotes. The most significant one was on page 15, which was the one where they talked about, which referenced the fact that Krona's story originally appeared in Green Lantern number 40. There's also a footnote on page 20 where they mention, well, one of the Guardians is telling them about how it's been a millennium since they have been betrayed the last time, and there's a footnote in the issue which says since Sinestro of Kuragar, no doubt, but that footnote was eliminated for the collected edition. Interesting to note, the footnotes are all done by Karen Berger. Karen Berger took over as editor for Legion of Superheroes with issue 294. There was a small introduction in the letters page of this issue. There was no letters page in issue 294 because the story took up too much space. In many comic books letters pages, it's the editor who writes the comments, the responses and the comments on the letters page, the responses to the letters from people who have read the comic books. In this case, though, it's Paul Levitz, as it has been in prior issues. But the thing is, the way you read this, so he opens with an introduction of Karen Berger, but then as I read this, it became very clear that this letters page was originally intended, because of some of the references they make, to appear in issue 294. But they didn't change anything, even though it eventually got published in issue 295. And it's a couple pages of letters. There's nothing too important in any of the letters. What we do get, in addition to the letters, I guess part of the letters page, or the last column or column and a half of the second page, is we get the end of the profiles of members of the Legion of Superheroes. We get Shadowlash, Shrinking Violet, Starboy, Sunboy, Superboy, Supergirl, Timberwolf, Tyrock, Ultra Boy, and Wildfire. And all of these profiles are, like a couple sentences about them, what their first appearance was, where their first appearance was, and that's more or less it. It's not like a who's who. I mean, it's a very abbreviated version of who's who. And then in addition to those regular members, there's also a list of, they list out the honorable members: Pete Ross, Elastic Lad, also known as Jimmy Olsen, Kid Psycho, Insect Queen, also known as Lana Lang, and Ron Vidar, who is the son of Universo, who I mentioned a few minutes ago, who is the Ron Vidar, and Vidar was the name of this Green Lantern that the Legion had to take down because he was trying to look, once again, get the secrets of the universe, secrets of the origin of the universe. And I'm going to do a little more research on this because, and I've looked into this Vidar and Ron Vidar, I believe, are both going to show up again, but not immediately, not in the next issue. And I guess I'm going to be spoiling some of this, but I do like to dig into this. Universo is a character who's shown up before, but I have not done my research on him at this point. I've only done a cursory amount of research. I don't want to go into too much. I don't want to go on, talk about him some more because I have not done more research about him. But on the whole, I thought this was a really neat issue. It's obviously not part of the Great Darkness Saga proper, even though it is included in the deluxe edition. But it's if you were... I had never read this issue before. And it definitely feeds into Crisis on Infinite Earths. And it makes me wonder how much of this fed into... Obviously, Marv Wolfman must have read this issue when he was in the process of putting together Crisis on Infinite Earths, because this definitely feeds into that. It's a very cool issue. I don't know. It made me think. It made me do research. It made me learn stuff. I didn't realize that Krona had not appeared in had not had that many appearances before. I mean, my only encounter with him before was in Crisis on Infinite Earths. I have not read very much of the old Green Lantern stories, so very little. But so this was a very cool issue, and it really made me think, and I really like that. I've done a little more research, and I have a couple more things that I want to touch on. The first is Universo. I pulled out the issue of Who's Who, the definitive directory of the DC Universe, the original edition of it, that features Universo. His entry doesn't add a whole lot of information to what is revealed in this issue. Basically, what happens in this issue is mentioned in his entry and is supposed to be his first encounter with the Legion, although in terms of publication history, he first appeared back in 1966 in Adventure Comics number 349, and then they also encountered him again in Adventure Comics 359 and 360. As revealed in this issue, he was originally a Green Lantern. You can read the entry. It doesn't add a whole lot. Now, one thing that I did find is that in the series that follows this one, the 1984, the Baxter series of the Legion of Superheroes, there is a story called the Universo Project. It's a 4-issue series. All 4 of these issues are available on Comixology. By Google searching Universo, I came up with this. It was issues 32 through 35. And they're all available for $1.99 each. You may be able to find them in back issue bins at conventions for less than that. I'm not sure. I haven't read this story. I'm not familiar with this story, but I thought it was worth mentioning. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and this I found in the 6th issue of Who's Who in the Legion of Superheroes, is the Time Institute. According to this issue of Who's Who in the Legion of Superheroes, the Time Institute is located in or near Metropolis, and it is part of Metropolis University. It was created with funding from Metropolis University and United Planets. There isn't a whole lot here. It's basically a few pictures and a few sentences about it. It really doesn't delve in too much. But I thought it was worth mentioning that I had looked into this, and this is what I was able to find about it. Oh, and the other thing is that this is where Brainiac 5... Wait, was it Brainiac 5? Is that what this said? Yeah, it says this is where Brainiac 5 helped to build the first functioning time travel mechanism, the time bubble. But I thought the time bubble was what the original Legionnaires, the original 3 Legionnaires, used to travel back in time and meet Superboy for the first time, and they had not Brainiac 5 was not one of the original three. Of course, the history of the Legion of Superheroes has been rewritten so many times that I'm not sure at the time that the Who's Who in the Legion of Superheroes, which is cover dated October, this issue, cover dated October of 88. At this point, maybe Brainiac 5 was supposed to be one of the original Legionnaires, which is part of the reason I haven't really tried to keep up with everything that's going on in the history of the Legion of Superheroes, but it's kind of fun to dip in and dip out of it from time to time. You just can't get too overwrought about trying to get it all to make sense, because it just won't, because they've just redone it so many times, like a lot of things in comic. Since recording the meat of this episode, I bought Crisis on Multiple Earths, the Team-Ups, Volume 1, which includes Green Lantern number 40. I have read it, and you can find my notes about it on my notes blog. A little over a month ago, at the 2016 Baltimore Comic-Con, I bought the 3-issue Tales of the Green Lantern Corps miniseries from 1981. I have just started to read it, and I'm thinking of doing a Green Lantern episode that covers Green Lantern 40 and the 3-issue miniseries. I'm not sure if I will do an episode or not, but either way, I will make notes which will be available on my notes blog. Before I get back to the Great Darkness Saga, I hope to do the second and final installment of my coverage of Teen Titans Season 1, and also an episode on a Silver Age Captain America story that I read just recently for the first time. That's it for episode 126. Dave Talks Comics can be found at davetalkscomics.com, as well as on iTunes, Stitcher, and a few other locations. You can find my notes blog at davetalkscomicsnotes.blogspot.com. If you have comments or questions, I can be reached at davetalkscomics@gmail.com, on Twitter at davetalkscomics, or leave a comment on my website. I'm Dave. Thank you for listening.